Hey guys, today we are going to be working with quadrilaterals and specifically properties of quadrilaterals. So, just a reminder that a quadrilateral is a polygon that has exactly four sides. So, you'll see here the most popular quadrilaterals I have listed on the picture. And today we're going to be focusing on, once again, this idea of a categorizing or classifying different shapes based off of their properties and what makes them that shape. So before we jump into our hierarchy of quadrilaterals, I want to start with an easier example just to kind of help you understand what a hierarchy is, and then we'll move to the shapes for today. So a hierarchy is just a special way of ranking things or ordering things based off of starting off with like a main broad category. And each time you get to a subcategory, you get more specific and specific and specific. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. Let's say I'm starting off with animals, and let's just do two subcategories. Let's say one type of animal is a reptile, and another type of animal is a mammal. So a reptile is a type of animal that is it's cold-blooded. They typically lay eggs, and they have dry, scaly skin. Whereas a mammal, they give birth without laying eggs, and they are warm-blooded. So both of these are types of animals. They fall under the umbrella of animal, but a reptile is not a mammal, just like a mammal is not a reptile. They're two very separate things. So let's go ahead and look at some more specific things we could say. Let's say we could do a reptile as a snake. We could also categorize a reptile as a lizard. Once again, it's a reptile, but more specific. And for mammals, let's do dog. And let's do a bear. So obviously I could make a whole bunch of different subcategories, but all of these, the way I want to show you the way this works is, for example, a dog is a mammal, but it's also an animal. A dog is not a reptile, just like a bear is not a reptile. A mammal is not a reptile. So you can't jump categories, but you go to the subcategory, and each time you add another subcategory, it gets more specific. So over here, I could add even more subcategories. A dog, I could say, okay, we could do a specific type of dog, a beagle or a lab. A bear, we could do a black bear or a polar bear. So you see, as you get down, farther down the chain, you get more specific character traits of those specific animals. So although a black bear is a type of mammal, it is not a dog. So you see how you can't jump categories. So now we're going to be using this idea of a hierarchy, and we're going to be using a hierarchy using shapes. So once again, we're focusing on classifying here, in this case, as a polygon. We learned yesterday that a polygon has at least three sides. It's 2D, no curves, no gaps. And now we're going to be looking at a subcategory. Yesterday, we talked about the subcategory triangle. Today, we're going to be looking at quadrilateral. So a quadrilateral is a polygon that has exactly four sides. So it fits all of the properties of a polygon. It must have at least three sides, no curves, no gaps, but it's a special type of polygon because it has exactly four sides. Now, there are three main subcategories underneath quadrilateral. So the first quadrilateral that we're going to talk about is a kite. And a kite, what makes something a kite is that there's two pairs of adjacent sides that are equal in length. So you might ask me, what is adjacent sides? Adjacent sides are sides that share a vertex or a corner. So let me just show you here. The adjacent sides here, same length. Remember yesterday we learned that the lines here, they called congruent lines. They tell you that they're the same length. They're congruent with one another. And then these are also adjacent sides because they are sharing a vertex or a corner. So you'll see here you have two pairs of adjacent sides, and that's what makes a kite. So the next type that I want to talk about is a trapezoid. So trapezoids can come in all shapes and different sizes. These are all examples of trapezoids. But the property that causes something to be a trapezoid is that only one side of the sides are parallel with one another. So once again, parallel lines mean that if the lines go on forever, they'll never cross. So in this case, the parallel lines in these problems, I'm just going to highlight some of them to show you. So in this is a base, they call them the bases. They're parallel. Here we got the parallel lines. These are parallel lines. These ones are parallel. So they're the sides that are straight. They kind of look like straight and they wouldn't ever cross. So these are all examples of trapezoids. Now I can tell you, depending on what book you use, like Pennsylvania says that the definition of a trapezoid is only one side of parallel sides. But there are some mathematicians in the world that changed this definition and said that it has at least one set of parallel sides. And we're going to come and take a look at that a little bit later. The last main category of quadrilaterals is going to be a parallelogram. What makes something a parallelogram is a quadrilateral that has opposite sides that are equal in length and opposite sides that are parallel with one another. So both set of sides are parallel and would never cross. Now, just like with our animals hierarchy, where we can split a mammal and a reptile into more specific categories, we're going to be doing that with parallelograms because there are special types of parallelograms, which, in other words, quadrilaterals that have opposite sides that are equal and opposite sides that are parallel that are set different than one another. The first parallelogram, a special type of parallelogram we're going to talk about, is a rectangle. So a rectangle is a parallelogram, which means it has opposite sides that are equal and opposite sides that are parallel. But what's special about a rectangle is that all four corners are right angles, so 90-degree angles. So you can say that a rectangle is a parallelogram with four right 90-degree angles. The next type of parallelogram or special type of parallelogram is a rhombus. And a rhombus is a parallelogram, so opposite sides are equal, opposite sides are parallel, but it's a special because all sides are equal length. So you'll see here I did my best drawing of a quadrilateral, or sorry, a rhombus. So here's some better examples of rhombuses. So once again, parallelogram, opposite sides are equal and parallel, but they have, I'm using congruent lines to show that all sides are equal. You might say, Mrs. Steffi, that kind of looks like a kite. Well, here's the trick. Believe it or not, this is where our hierarchy gets a little bit more complicated because we can actually say that a rhombus is a special type as kite as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a line from the kite to the rhombus to show that, hey, guess what? A rhombus can be called a parallelogram. It can also be called a kite, which is pretty wild because not all parallelograms are kites, but rhombuses is a special type of parallelogram that is also a kite. The last quadrilateral that we're going to be talking about is a super, super special shape, and that is the square. Because the square, the properties of a square is it's a parallelogram because opposite sides are equal and opposite sides are parallel that has four equal sides and four right angles. Well, if you look at the definition of a rectangle has four right angles. So a parallelogram of four right angles is a rectangle. Guess what? A square can also be categorized as a rectangle. Because of the fact that it's a special one. It's a special rectangle that just so happens to have four sides that are also equal. Well, let's think about the fact that it needs to have four equal sides. That's what we learned is the property of a rhombus. So since a rhombus has four equal sides, a square is a special type of rhombus. So I'm going to draw a line from the square to the rhombus because I can say a square is also a rhombus since it has all sides that are equal. So this right here is the hierarchy that can be a little bit complicated, but it's all based off of taking a quadrilateral and making it the definitions or the character traits more specific to get to a different type of shape. So I want to show you how we can kind of use this to give different shapes different name. So this specific shape is a parallelogram, and that is actually the most specific name you can give this shape because of the fact that it doesn't have sides that are 90-degree angles, so it's not a rectangle. It doesn't have all sides that are equal, so it's not a rhombus. It's not a trapezoid. It's not a kite. So parallelogram is the most specific name you can give it. But also, we can name this as a quadrilateral because a parallelogram, all parallelograms fall underneath a quadrilateral. And if you go back here, you can see since the parallelogram falls underneath the category of the quadrilateral, that means it also has exactly four sides. Just like in the previous example where we said a dog is also a mammal, that's kind of what we're doing here with the shapes. And then the last thing here, we can also classify this as a polygon because once again, we learned that all quadrilaterals fall under this umbrella of this idea of a polygon, at least three sides, no curves, no gaps. So a parallelogram's specific definition is a quadrilateral that has opposite sides that are equal and opposite sides that are parallel. So let's just think of a couple other examples. If I talk about the kite, I can say a kite is a quadrilateral that is also a polygon because it all follows underneath it. I cannot say that all kites are rhombuses because we learned that a rhombus is a special type of kite. So I can't classify a kite as a rhombus, but a kite is a kite, a quadrilateral, and a polygon. Let's see if you guys can classify all of the definitions or all of the names for a rectangle. So let's follow our hierarchy here. A rectangle is a special type of parallelogram because it has opposite sides that are equal and parallel. Since it's a parallelogram, it is also a quadrilateral because it has exactly four sides, and it is a polygon because it is a quadrilateral. So rectangle can be called a rectangle, a parallelogram, a quadrilateral, or a polygon. And let's see if we can go ahead and name all of them for a square. So a square's most specific name is a square, but you can also say that a square is a special type of rectangle. It's also because it's a rectangle with four equal sides. It's also a special type of rhombus because it is a rhombus that has four right angles. Since it is a rectangle and a rhombus, it's also classified as a parallelogram. And then it also falls underneath the umbrella of quadrilateral and polygon. So notice how a square, the most specific name for that shape is a square, but since it follows all of the properties of the shapes above, it can be called a rectangle, a rhombus, a parallelogram, a quadrilateral, a polygon, and a square is actually a special type of kite. Because remember, since we said a rhombus is a special type of kite, since a square is a rhombus, that means that a rhombus or a square is also a kite. So you can follow the hierarchy backwards to find the different names for the shape. I'm going to leave you today with these two questions. So this is something that you may have heard of before. Someone might ask you, is a square a rectangle or is a rectangle a square? And now we can use our hierarchy that we set up to kind of help us. So is a square a rectangle? Well, if we go down to square, a square is a parallelogram with four equal sides and four right angles. Well, a rectangle has four right angles. So a square is a special type of rectangle. Now let's look at the other question. Is a rectangle a square? So if I'm in this category as a rectangle, it means four right angles. That's what classifies something as a rectangle. So in this case, it says nothing about needing four equal sides. So sometimes squares are rectangles, but a rectangle is not always a square because if it doesn't have four equal sides, then it's not a square. So that's just like saying a lab is a special type of dog, but not all dogs are labs because of the fact that this lab is a subcategory of A dog, same thing. A square is a subcategory of the rectangle. So it is a rectangle, but it's not the other way around. So this can be a little bit confusing when we're talking about properties of shapes. Hopefully this diagram, since we went through and like kind of created it together, makes a little more sense to you. Today we're going to be practicing a little bit with naming some quadrilaterals, as well as practicing how to identify different ones.